Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
I own quite a large portion of land just south of Spearfish in South Dakota. Most of this is forest that I just leave wild, while I keep a couple of acres for growing vegetables and raising a few hens and goats. I rarely venture into the forest except at the beginning of fall, and even then just to walk and not really to disturb the tranquil woods. Well, all of that changed on the 9th of August when I decided to go for one of those routine walks. I was about 6 miles away from my property when I came across a clearing in the woods. The clearing was about 1/4 of a mile across, and everything had been singed and blackened like there had been a huge explosion. The grass was all dead and scorched. My first impression was that perhaps a meteorite had come down, but surely I would have heard that as I hadn't been away all year and there was nothing on the news. Also, there was no sign of a crater, just burn marks everywhere. I walked out of the forest into this clearing and towards the center to observe the carnage around. I noticed it was eerily quiet, no usual sounds of birds or forest life. It was at that moment that I saw a small green plant growing from the black ground. Now either this must have been an unusually fast grower, or it had survived what wiped everything else out there because there was nothing else, not even grass. It was about 10 inches tall and had small buds growing out of it. The location of the plant roughly in the center also drew it to my attention. I got a strange vibe from the whole situation, so I figured I'd go home and revisit the site in a couple of days. Fast forward to next weekend. On Saturday the 16th, I decided to go along the same route. What drew me on was a weird sense of curiosity, the inability to forget that weird feeling I got in the burned circle. I broke into the clearing a little surprised. Was it my imagination, or had it definitely grown since the last time I was here? I looked around and confirmed to myself that the scorch marks had grown, and yet as I reached over a small brow, I could see the strange plant was still there, only this time it was at least 3 feet tall. And stranger still, no grass or other wildlife had grown in this area, so the whole thing couldn't be explained by a blast of any kind. I had brought some tools with me this time. First of all, I wanted to measure the blacked clearing. It turned out to be roughly 2,500 feet in diameter. It was when I divided the circle in 2 areas that I came to a horrifying mathematical truth. The plant that had grown so quickly in a week was at the direct center of the clearing. Every direction I measured the plant was between 1,240 and 1,260 feet away from the center. The plant itself was bright green, like a mamba if you've ever seen one, and the yellow buds were now the size of a golf ball, throbbing like grubs. I broke one off and it splattered in my hand at the lightest touch, staining my hand bright yellow. Now I've read enough creepy stuff on here and other places to know that this plant had to go. I went home and got my shovel, tried to wash the yellow stuff off, but it wouldn't budge even with bleach. I arrived back at the plant and got to work. The roots of the plant were black like the soil, and it was difficult to tell them apart. But I knew when I hit a root because the shovel wouldn't budge. They were rock solid. So I started digging around them, exposing the roots and piling the soil aside. I worked feverishly like this most of the day, leaving a mound of soil behind me. By Sunday, I was already down to shoulder height. The roots just kept twisting their way deeper. There was no way to break them, and I didn't have the courage to dig until sundown. I could swear the plant had grown overnight. As the afternoon faded, I always got the same creepy feeling, that voice in my head saying, "Run." I had to work that week, and the image of the planet and its vile roots kept me awake at night. I covered the yellow stain on my hand with a bandage and told everybody at work that I cut myself on a piece of glass. On Saturday morning, I took a hacksaw, ropes, my shovel, and some food, and headed straight for the clearing. The clearing had grown, but I didn't bother measuring it this time. The plant in the center was my height now, over 6 feet tall, and the buds were the size of my fist. Thank God that the mound of earth and exposed roots proved that the plant wasn't supernatural, or I would have run straight out of there and never returned. So on Saturday and Sunday, I dug. I dug deeper than my own height and installed a rope to climb up and down, as I didn't enjoy staying down there for more than an hour at a time. And I was sure not to let the sun go down on me by setting an alarm. My hacksaw had little effect on the roots and just blunted the blade. It was like sawing at military-grade titanium or something. I noticed that instead of growing thinner as you would expect roots to do, they were growing wider. Now 10 feet underground, the roots were as wide as my leg, where previously they'd been an inch or two at the most. All of the digging had made me nauseous, but by late Sunday afternoon I'd struck gold, or at least something. The shovel made a lethal crack on the ground, the surface of which was black, and I couldn't make out whether it was rock, metal, or something else which blocked my way. I widened out the hole which I had dug for a couple of hours, but everywhere at this specific height my digging was obstructed by what seemed like a flat surface. At this point I noticed that the eerie silence was even silenter than usual, and fear was gripping me tightly. I awoke from a kind of daze to realize that the sky above me had turned dark in the space of 5 minutes. The rope, which had been sturdy just a moment ago, was loose, and as I tugged it a little too frantically, it fell into the hole with me. I was filled with a great terror as I was trapped in the hole that I dug and scrambled away from the black roots. But there was no killer plant or sudden death. I attached my hacksaw to the rope and threw it a couple of times. Thankfully, it got stuck on a nearby rock and I was able to get out, minus my shovel. I hurriedly gathered my things and ran out of the clearing with the darkness behind me. That ever-growing black clearing with the plant at the center. When I arrived home, I was a shaking, nervous wreck. What could this be? Extraterrestrial activity? Something caused by a scrap of uranium in the ground or something? I hadn't had myself checked out for radiation, but I felt okay, except that vomit stain yellow on my hand wouldn't go away, even if I'd burned off a few layers of skin with paint remover. Last week, I became fixated on the plant and the clearing at work. Sooner or later, the blackened clearing would reach my house, and what then? It was my land, so there was little the authorities could do about a spooky piece of burned forest. What had I discovered 20 or so feet below the earth where the plant's jet and impenetrable roots spread out into some kind of plate? I prepared during the evenings, got a few sticks of dynamite together, a fuse, a can of gas, with my eye kept on the dark forest behind my house. I figured something has to damage this thing more than my cheap hacksaw, and I'm not taking any chances. I'm going to blow the whole thing sky high. What will await me after the dust settles, I don't know, but today I'm going to try to end this evil before it gets out of hand. Please, if I don't report back, stop the darkness spreading.
When I was 20, I was out of a job and didn't have any university or plans on going to university. I was basically lost in limbo without knowing where to turn next. I was living at home and spent hours on the internet, staying up all night and sleeping all day. I was always a bit of an introvert that preferred the company of me, myself, and I. Staying up through the night and disregarding the day was a way out of the norm and avoiding people altogether. Then I got the classic talk from my dad that all kids get when they're useless, sitting at home doing nothing. I was tired of hearing it, so I decided I needed to move out to continue my lazy, antisocial behavior. I have family way up north in the sticks. There is nothing around except a couple sawmills and a couple nickel mines. My grandfather has a piece of property that is over 350 acres of unexplored bush. It was hardly farmable, just a giant section of woods, streams, ponds, and rock. My grandfather has a timeshare in Florida, so he was gone for the rest of the year. I called him and asked if I could go up there to live. In exchange, I would do lumberjacking for wood to sell and use. I remember his comments exactly. Yeah, I don't give a shit. You're wasting your time up there. No work, no school, no people, no internet. But if that's what you want, go ahead and knock yourself out. Just don't burn down my fucking house. My bags were already packed. I knew he wouldn't mind. I told my dad what I was doing. He was pretty much speechless and had a look of concern. He then told me I was wasting my life and should go to school. I told him it was what I wanted and needed to do. We parted ways. I got into my '93 Civic hatch that had a shot suspension and bald tires and took a 14-hour car ride to no man's land. I was happier than a pig in shit. I made myself good and comfy when I got to the house. It was given to my grandfather by an Irishman that passed on. He built the house with his family in the mid-1800s as a kid and been there ever since. If you ever seen the Amityville Horror, it looks just like that house but much, much smaller. The stove was an old black cast iron beast, the kind you only see in movies or on an old historic village tour. It had a large barn full of tools and an old JD tractor, a smokehouse for meats, a large veggie garden, an outhouse and a chicken coop that wasn't in use anymore. After unpacking and relaxing, the distance and fact I was alone began to set in. There wasn't a TV, internet, or video game in sight. Luckily, my grandfather had 2 snowmobiles, a 4-wheeler, a gator and dirt bike, and lots of hunting rifles and shotguns to boot. I figured most of my time would be spent outdoors, which was okay, but I was a bit nervous. The next day I drove into town, if you could even call it that. I stocked up on canned goods and cupboard food that could survive a nuclear holocaust. I came back and got to lumberjacking. It was slow at first to remember everything my grandpa had shown me as a kid, 8 to 12 years old. But after 4 or 5 hours, I had it down pat. I'd take the tractor, chains and hooks, a jerry can and chainsaw to the bush. I'd find a cedar or spruce tree, cut it down, chain it up to the tractor and drag it off to the main trail where I had a normal flatbed trailer waiting. I'd then cut it up into 2 to 3 foot sections and stack it. Once the trailer was full, I'd tow it to the barn, where in the back was a large hydraulic wood splitter. I'd split it into 4 to 6 sections depending on the diameter of the piece. Once I cut it all, I stacked it all. This was the routine. It was long and hard work, but it gave me a purpose and gave me joy. I thought of myself as a pioneer. I was in the great outdoors, alone, taking down trees and supplying villagers with something they needed to survive. I felt proud of myself and made cash doing it. While I wasn't getting rich, I had enough for all the amenities that were needed to survive in such a place. I kept this routine for months, and locals began coming to me for wood because it was cheap, and I was a youngster looking after my grandfather's home, who was well thought of in town. Then winter came and everything went to shit. Winter on the farm was one of the most depressing times of my life. Not being able to do much work and have no interesting human contact or internet really brought me down. I reflected on my life and the fact I had no friends anymore because I had abandoned them with no warning. Why I did this, I do not know, but I had some type of mental feeling that I had to leave everyone behind and never speak to them again. I began having thoughts of death. The more I thought about offing myself, the more I accepted it as being an okay thing to do. I wasn't religious, so I didn't have the thought of going straight to hell. I viewed it more as, if a goldfish were to die, where do you think it would go? I think it doesn't go anywhere. It is just dead, blackness, no more thoughts, like turning off a car for good. I thought about how my family would miss me and how it would hurt them. But I was so depressed, unhappy and discomforted by my progress in life and the fact I had no one. After a few weeks of negative 30 Celsius weather and brutal snow, I decided to get on a snowmobile, load up my snowshoes, take my rifle and go deep into the bush to end my mental suffering. I had given up on everything. I jumped on the sled at 8 a.m. The sun was brighter than ever. You couldn't look anywhere without squinting your eyes like an Eskimo. The sun reflected off the snowy landscape as if it were a mirror. With a full tank and a jerry can as a backup, I could go a long ways away. I let the skidoo idle and get warmed up. I was thinking to myself that I may actually go through with this. I kept going over what ifs and buts in my head, as if I were trying to talk myself out of it. I said fuck it out loud and jumped on the skidoo and let it rip. I took the tractor trail as far as it would go into the bush. It ends after a solid 45-minute drive, then turns into four-wheeler and gator trails. I took a trail deeper and deeper. After a solid 2.5 hours of riding, the trail stopped and did a U-turn. It was the end of the track. I then grabbed my rifle and put on my snowshoes. I quickly realized something. I hadn't written a note for anyone to find my body or even know what I had done. I knew that if my parents had no idea what had happened to me, they would wonder for the rest of their lives and it would tear them apart. I yelled out, "Fuck," and threw my rifle. I paced towards my sled and repeated what I said. I started to turn and remembered I literally just threw my rifle. Shit. Got off the sled and walked towards the rifle. I bent down and grabbed it and stood up, then froze stiff. A burst of adrenaline was injected throughout my entire body and turned my cold frame into a steel oven. There was a black figure in the distance hiding behind a tree watching me. It wasn't an animal. It looked like the shape of a man, but it wasn't a man. I ran onto my sled and hit the throttle. I ripped back home and didn't look back. To get back home, it only took me maybe another 2.5 hours. I rode hard. I got inside the house, put coffee on, and ate fried bologna with beans and toast. As I pigged out, I kept that thing's image in my head, and I was wondering what it was. How did it get there? For how long has it been here? Does it know I am here? How could it survive? Is it coming for me? Can it follow my snowmobile tracks? Does my grandpa know? I then decided to call my grandfather in Florida. He didn't answer his phone. He was probably chilling on the beach drinking beers. I thought, fuck. I called my dad just to calm my nerves. He could sense something was off about me and asked me what was up. I told him I was out hunting and I saw something. I described what I saw and he went silent over the phone. He took a breath and he said, "Son, when I was a kid living on the farm, me and a girl went back to the lake for a swim. We got there on our bicycles in August. I had my rifle with me because of all the bears that passed through the land. After me and the girl were swimming around and laughing and doing our thing, she screamed and pointed across. I looked across the pound and there stood what looked like a burned-up human being. He was charred up, had a bit of head hair, eyes as bright and blue as I had ever seen. Its arms were so long its hands nearly came to its knees. It screeched at us with the most insane volume I had heard that birds flew out of the trees. I ran out of the pond, grabbed my rifle and shot at it. It ran into the trees and me and the girl jumped on our bikes and gave it shit all the way home. That was the first and final time I had ever seen that thing. I actually hadn't thought of it in years and years until you told me that. You need to be really careful, son. In fact, why don't you just come home? It's boring up there anyways." I told him I was staying and enjoyed it here. I was lying now. I got off the phone with him feeling no better. The only difference was I could think clearer. I thought, if this thing is coming for me, it's going to take a while by foot. I got time. I got the guns and put a loaded one in every room. Some had slugs, some had shells. I also had a hatchet that I sharpened to a very fine thickness with a stone grinder in the barn. If I swung at your wrist with one swift motion, it would probably take your hand right off, or at least leave it hanging by a thread. As nightfall drew closer, I made one final meal and killed all the lights and left all the blinds open for good visibility and to make it hard for whatever is out there to see me inside. I went upstairs, which was 2 bedrooms that had large windows and one walkout balcony. I thought this would be an excellent spot to watch and snipe. As I settled in to see if this thing would come, I began thinking about what I was going to do earlier. I still was depressed, but because I was active and keeping my mind on something, I didn't feel like offing myself anymore. Maybe that was it, I thought. Keeping active, busy, and productive, with a bit of excitement thrown in, keeps your mind off shit that doesn't really matter anyways. Just as I was having a bit of a personal milestone, I heard heavy footsteps in the snow. I looked out the window and before my eyes stood that thing I had seen earlier, but now in full view. I got a strong feeling of nervousness and my abdomen tightened and barked at me as if I were about to shit myself at any moment from sheer fear. It was just as my dad described to me, piercing blue eyes, almost glowing. The moonlight reflected off of them like the cover of the dark side of the moon. It had the color and appearance of the grit in the bottom of your barbecue if you don't clean it much. I ran out on the porch to get a shot off. It darted off around the house before I could even lift my weapon. Fuck! Ran inside again. Ran to other window. I could see it again. Just standing there like an idiot watching me. I turned the crank and the window opened up. I said, "Who are you?" It didn't respond. It just stared at me. I repeat, "Tell me who you are." or I'm going to shoot you." It then said its name. It said in a slow, drawn-out, harsh, hoarse voice, "Jurdak, my name." I said, "What do you want with me? I am minding my own business. What are you doing here? Please leave me." It then walked closer to the house and looked up at me. My nose was filled with the most pungent odor ever. It then said, "If you won't, I will," in that same exact voice that can almost not be described unless it was mimicked with some type of computer sound program. I said, "Do what?" It said, "Kill yourself. You failed." My heart froze. I decided not to do it. It then stretched its arms out to the wall of the house and began scaling it like it was Spider-Man. I yelled and panicked from sheer shock and fumbled my rifle. It fell right out of the window, and by that time it was feet away from the window. It reached its god-awful hand into the window and cut my arm with its fingernail. I grabbed my hatchet and buried it in its forearm, and it made a sound a bear makes when you shoot it. It fell to the ground on its side, and I ran for the spare gun in the room. I came back to the window and it was running for the barn. I took a shot, but it didn't do much. This gun had a shell, and it isn't ideal for the range I fired at. I pushed my dresser to the hall and pushed it down the stairs. I then pushed the bed to the hall and pushed it down the stairs. I then pushed a few end tables in the staircase. I essentially clogged it up so it couldn't get up there from the main floor. I know it can climb now, but I'd prefer to only have to cover 2 sides, then multiple sides. I locked the door and just kept my eyes and ears open. I didn't see it again. Daybreak came quickly. I could see its blood droplets in the snow. I climbed over and pulled shit out of the stairs and investigated. It was nowhere to be found. I grabbed my rifle and followed the droplets. It went down the tractor trail. I walked for 10 minutes following this trail. I could see it go off even further and its foot tracks as well. I decided it wasn't worth it to go ahead and hunt it. It probably went as deep, if not deeper, the first time I had seen it. I decided it was time to leave this place for good. I went inside, grabbed my clothes, got into my car and started driving off. I never told my dad or my grandpa. I still have nightmares of these things and wonder how it knew what I was thinking or going to do. I have been trying to research other sightings and descriptions of it, but can find nothing, unfortunately. I don't want to say it is a demon because I really don't know or believe in that. I don't know what it is. No idea. All I know is for the last 8 years since it has happened, I have had a slew of health problems and bad luck. I have night terrors of Jurdak almost 95% of my sleeps. I have to take medications just to fall asleep. I think it may have been the nail that cut me when it reached into the window. I often wonder if it is still up there. I know that isn't a worthy ending to the story, but it is what it is. What else can I say?
Awesome story, OP. It's neat that it could talk and had a name. How tall was it? Did it just look like a charred human? Or did it have any strange animal-like features? Also, I'm not sure about the health problems, but I am sure that the dreams will stop. However, in order for the dreams to stop, you must confront the beast and end it, once and for all.
I think it may have been about 6'3" or so, quite tall. It had a very long face, a large overbite. It looked human, but not human, almost like it was missing some chromosome or something. Maybe one day when I get a death wish, I'll head back and go for it. My grandpa passed away 4 years ago. The property was sold to clear-cutters by my dad and his sisters. As far I know, the house was knocked down, and they put up a small office and living quarters for the lumberjacks who clear-cut there. This is near Chapleau, Ontario, off the beaten path.
Arm yourself and hunt the fucker down. If I wasn't so far north in Quebec, I would probably go.
I actually did that maybe 3 years ago. The workers had already been there for a year. I actually said that I was a fisheries and wildlife technician for the region, and that I had heard of a sighting of a creature, described as the one I encountered. They said they hadn't seen anything of the sort. You gotta remember, though, my grandfather's land had boundaries. But past those boundaries, the bush simply continues on crown land for miles upon mules. It's basically a frontier. I somehow doubt it is dead because my dad had seen it. I had seen it over 25 years when he seen it, and it knew my thoughts. There is something about it that isn't natural. Also, I hammered it in the forearm with that axe. I know for a fact I broke its forearm bones because I heard them break. I also know the axe went all the way through its arm because the flat back of the axe was buried into its arm. If it's like you and me, that kind of wound in -25 weather, it's highly possible it did die. But I don't know, man. I think about it a lot. I sometimes wish, like you guys have said, that I continued on and tracked it. But I was spooked. It was cold and I was shook to my core.
I have a few. True stories, actually. None of them are paranormal, I think, but still creepy. When my great-grandma was moving into my grandmother's house, she had dementia and all that. We had to go to her house and clean it out. I was about 14 at the time, and my cousin, who was about 18, was there with us helping. He and I got bored, so we told my grandpa we were going to go explore. My great-grandma lived on the outskirts of a very small, very poor, very crime-ridden town. In hindsight, us going out running around was probably really dangerous. But where the town ended, the thick trees, abandoned trailers, and homes began. I picked up a stick. My cousin, however, got the better end of the deal since he got to carry the BB gun. I'm older, so I get to have it. You'll probably shoot me or yourself, he said. I really didn't care. When I was 14, I played way too many RPGs and thought the sword I had was way better. It was hot. There were grasshoppers bigger than my head darting through the tall grass that filled in the small gaps between the trees. And my cousin was blurting out random hip-hop verses. He was pretty wiggery, but still a pretty cool guy. We made our way towards a truck that was broken down in the clearing about 1/4 of a mile from the house. We, of course, smashed every smashable thing on that thing. Windows, mirrors, the rusted-out bumpers, all of it. It didn't belong to anyone, so no harm was really done to anyone but ourselves. My cousin managed to slice his hand open. Shit gets real in the next part, I promise. So after smashing up the truck, we walked a little further and found a very small, half-burned-down house. Our grandmother had told us about it. Apparently it was a meth lab gone wrong or something, so of course into the meth lab we went. It was almost surreal. One half of the house was nearly perfect. Pictures of kids on the wall, a fridge, a TV in front of a chair. But on the other side, trees were growing into the house. Charred wood jutted out between tall grass and branches. We, of course, made sure the normal part of the house was made even by breaking all the mirrors and pictures and the TV. Oh, the TV was the best. My cousin shot the glass out and it exploded. Well, as we were laughing our asses off, I glanced out the burnt-out side of the house and saw a man in army fatigues, a floppy straw farmer's hat, and with a white beard that covered his chest. My cousin waved, and the guy just walked off. We noticed behind where he was standing was a trailer with an open door. Probably his, my cousin whispered. Let's go look inside. Bad idea number. 0.10,000 we had that day. We walked up to the open door and noticed that there was a weird screen door to the left of the open door. Okay, before I go any further, let me set it up for you. We're basically in the middle of nowhere, about a mile away from our family. Nobody would have come to find us for hours, nor would they actually find us for an even longer amount of hours. It was getting dark. You could hear cicadas buzzing all around, and I can swear I heard a banjo or two. We were in Hills Have Eyes worthy territory. I had just seen that movie, and we had been joking about it for hours. Do you think this BB gun can take out a mutated hillbilly dude? Watch, that truck belonged to some inbred hick, and he had fun with it. We done made her all ugly now. Okay, now that has been set up, my dumbass cousin says, dude, it's like I'm on SWAT, then kicks that screen door in. As he kicked the door in, we noticed a bunch of lumps in the floor and on nasty couches in the trailer. The lumps start moving and one of them sits up. I notice a bunch of used syringes scattered about the floor. Holy shit, fuck, PFT! My cousin shoots the BB gun off in the general direction of the 6 or 7 hungover and high homeless men. We then ran as hard as we could, screaming of course, the entire mile or so back to my great-grandma's house. Getting whipped by tree branches and stepping on random sharp God knows what the whole way back. So we both come stumbling into the garage screaming about savage hobos covered in sticks, leaves, and cuts.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.